They said no woman could survive a week with the Apache rancher. They were wrong. But the woman who finally stayed wasn't looking for a husband. She was looking for a place to hide. The wind was a blade off the high country that morning. Tom Redhawk felt it cut through his coat, sharp with the memory of pine and old snow. He stood on the rise above his ranch, watching his own breath freeze in the air, just like the ghosts of his horses. From here, he could see it all. The fences he'd bled for, snaking across the land like stitches holding the world together. The corrals, the sheds, the whole spread hewn from the wilderness with his own 2 hands. This was the life he and Maria had dreamed of. A place to raise a family, a legacy. But there were no children, and there was no Maria. Just Tom, the land, and a silence so heavy it felt like being buried alive. 6 years. 6 years since he'd heard her laugh. 6 years since the sickening crack of that corral beam. He remembered running, his hands useless, his voice calling her name into an empty sky that gave no answer. Since then, work was the only thing that made sense. He was Apache, born of a Chiricahua mother, and labor was a language he understood. So he worked. He broke more land, built more barns, expanded the herd until the neighbors whispered his name with a mix of respect and fear. That Apache, running stock on white man's land. They kept their distance. He didn't mind. A ranch couldn't talk back at supper, it couldn't mend a shirt, but it couldn't betray you either. Still, the silence got deeper. The nights got colder. A man could work himself into the ground and find nothing at the end of the day but an empty grave. That's why he wrote the letters. Against every instinct, he scratched out the words on paper, his hand clumsy with a pen. I am looking for a wife. The ranch is strong. Life here is hard. I ask only for someone steady. In return, I give my word. I will provide, and I will keep faith. He sent it to a broker in Santa Fe, a flicker of hope he tried to crush before it could burn him. The first woman stepped off the stage, took one look at his copper skin and dark braids, and turned right back around. She didn't even take her trunk. The second one lasted 3 days. She loved the idea of the wild, but not the dirt and the sweat. Too big, too empty, she cried as the wagon carried her away. The third one hurt the worst. She was young, with bright eyes that made him dare to hope. She stayed one night. By morning, she was gone, riding off with his nearest neighbor, a man named McAllister, a man with whiter skin and smoother talk. She took his silver-backed hairbrush, a gift from his mother. Tom didn't chase them. He just watched the dust settle. His heart felt like a stone. After that, he almost gave up. Maybe the land was all he was meant for. But another letter arrived. Lily Jameson. Her words weren't fancy. They were blunt. She'd worked in a textile mill in Kansas, raising her younger siblings after their parents died. Now they were grown and gone. She was 28, unmarried and tired of city smoke. She wanted a place where her labor meant something. Just that. Simple, honest. He read the letter until the paper grew soft. He told himself not to hope. He told himself she'd be just like the others. She'd see his face and run. She'd hear the silence and break. But hope is a weed. It grows in the cracks of a man's resolve. The morning she was due to arrive, he paced the yard like a caged wolf. The supply wagon was late. Every gust of wind sounded like wheels, every rattle of branches like a harness. He'd split enough wood to last 2 winters. He'd fixed hinges that weren't broken. Finally, he heard it. The groan of axles, the call of a driver. He wiped his sweaty palms on his trousers and stepped out to meet the wagon, his heart hammering against his ribs. He told himself not to expect a thing, but he was still a man, and a man alone in the wild still longs for someone to share his fire. And he had no idea that the woman on that wagon wasn't just bringing a carpet bag. She was bringing a storm of her own. The wagon groaned into the yard, pulled by 2 exhausted mules. Old Jim Garrison, the driver, grinned a gap-toothed smile. "Got a passenger for you, Red Hawk," he called out. "Reckon she's tougher than the last one, rode all the way up here without a single complaint." Tom's eyes locked on the figure beside him. She was bundled in a plain wool coat, nothing fancy. Her shoulders were square, her body built for work, not for show. She looked out over his ranch with a cool, measuring gaze. Not awe, not fear, assessment. She stepped down from the wagon before Jim could offer a hand, her boots sinking into the hard, frozen ground. She turned to face him, and he saw a face carved by endurance, not youth. Dark hair pulled back tight, eyes the color of river stones. "Mr. Redhawk?" Her voice was crisp, practical. He just nodded. "I'm Lily Jameson. I've come as arranged. No frills, no false sweetness. Just a statement of fact." "Welcome to the Rim," he managed to say. "It's a hard place." Jim dropped off a few parcels. "Storm's coming in from the high country," he said with a wink. "You two make the best of it." And with that, he was gone, leaving Tom and Lily standing in a vast, spreading silence. He reached for her bag. "I can manage," she said, but let him take it. It was heavy. She hadn't packed for a short stay. He led her to the cabin. Inside, a fire smoldered in the hearth. The room smelled of pine smoke and the venison he'd cooked last night. It was a man's space, sturdy but cluttered. Tools leaned against the walls, boots were shoved under chairs, dishes were piled by the basin. Lily's eyes swept over everything, missing nothing. "You built this yourself," she stated. It wasn't a question. "Every log," he confirmed. "It's strong," she said, running a hand over the rough-hewn table. It wasn't flattery. It was the judgment of someone who knew good work. He showed her to the small room he'd prepared. The bed was narrow, but the quilts were clean. Maria had made them. He'd hesitated to put them out, but they belonged to the house. Lily set her bag down without a word about the colorful patterns. She just unwrapped her scarf and turned back to the main room. "Supper's almost ready," he said, busying himself at the fire. "Venison stew." "That will do." The meal was quiet. The stew was hearty. The bread was dense. Lily ate without complaint, her gaze occasionally flicking to the mess around them. The untidy shelves, the soot on the hearth. "You keep busy," she finally said. "There's always work." "And little time for order," she finished, her tone flat. "I get by," he said, a defensive edge to his voice. She dipped her bread in the stew. A man alone usually does, but two together might do better. The words hung in the air, heavier than the gathering storm outside. After the meal, he washed the bowls, feeling clumsy under her steady watch. He should have cleaned up. Maria would have scolded him. Later, as darkness fell, he grew restless. Lily sat by the fire, mending a tear in her glove with quick, precise stitches. Her hands never hesitated, just like his with a rope or an axe. She didn't chatter. She just worked. He watched her for a while, then stepped outside into the biting cold. The stars were like chips of ice scattered on black velvet. A woman had just crossed a continent because of his lonely words on a piece of paper. She wasn't some soft girl with romantic dreams. She was made of hardship, just like him. He didn't know if that would bind them together or tear them apart. He went back inside. She was unpinning her hair. It fell in a dark wave down her back. "Storm's coming," he said, stating the obvious. "You'll hear it in the timbers." "I've heard worse," she answered quietly. He nodded, his throat tight. "Good night, Lily." "Good night, Tom." He lay awake in his own room, listening to the wind rise in the pines. He could hear her moving softly through the thin wall. He'd told himself he was done with hope, but as the first flakes of snow began to hit the window pane, he felt it stir inside him, a fragile, unwelcome thing. But then he saw it. As she'd unpinned her hair, something had fallen from her pocket, rolling under the edge of the rug. A small, intricately carved wooden bird. It wasn't the kind of trinket a poor mill worker would own. It was fine, detailed work. He picked it up. It felt heavy, important. Where did she get it? And why did she hide it so quickly? The storm wasn't the only secret in that cabin tonight. By morning, the world was gone, buried under a thick white blanket of snow. The sky was a sagging gray sheet, dumping more and more of the stuff. A real blizzard. Tom knew the signs. They wouldn't be going anywhere for days. He was splitting kindling when Lily came out, her coat wrapped tight. "That sky looks mean," she said, her voice almost lost in the wind. "It'll snow for 3 more days at least," he replied. "We'd best be ready." She just nodded and started pulling his frozen laundry from the line without being asked. Quick, efficient, no wasted motion. By dusk, the wind was a screaming beast. It rattled the shutters and howled down the chimney, clawing at the log walls. "Will it hold?" Lily asked, her eyes fixed on the thick ceiling beams. "It's held worse," he said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. But he rose every hour to check the north wall, where the timbers had settled unevenly last spring. A draft cut through a tiny gap, cold as a razor. He stuffed rags into the crack, but the wind just pushed harder, groaning against the wood. For 3 days, the world was reduced to the 4 walls of that cabin. On the first day, Lily waged a silent war on his clutter. She reorganized the pantry, tutting under her breath. "You keep things like a man who never expects company," she said, her hands on her hips. "Mostly true," he grunted. "Well, you've got company now," she shot back. On the second day, the confinement started to fray her nerves. She snapped at him when he tracked slush by the door. "Do you never think to wipe your feet? Wasn't much point before." "There's a point now," she said, snatching his boots to set by the fire. He wanted to bark back, to remind her this was his house, but he didn't. Her scolding felt less like an insult and more like concern. It had been a long time since anyone cared if he ruined a floor. By the 3rd day, the walls felt like they were closing in. The roar of the wind was constant. And then they heard it. A deep, sickening crack from above. A main support beam in the roof, right over their heads, had split under the weight of the snow. Splinters rained down. The whole roof sagged, groaning in protest. "It's going to collapse!" Lily cried, her face pale. Panic seized Tom for a second, cold and sharp. This was it. The cabin, his fortress, was about to become his tomb. "Get back!" he yelled, shoving a table under the cracking beam. It splintered instantly. They needed something stronger. "The old anvil post!" he shouted over the wind. "In the shed!" It was a desperate gamble. Opening the door meant letting the blizzard in, but staying meant being crushed. He fought the door open against a wall of snow and wind. The storm exploded into the cabin, a blinding, freezing chaos of white. He couldn't see. He could barely breathe. "I can't find it," he yelled, clawing through the drift that now filled the shed. Suddenly, Lily was beside him, a rope in her hand. She'd tied one end to the doorframe. "Follow it back!" she screamed. She pushed a shovel into his hands. Together, they dug like madmen, the cold burning their lungs, their fingers going numb. They found the post, a thick, iron-hard piece of oak. It was impossibly heavy. "Together!" he yelled. They heaved, straining, muscles screaming. They dragged it back into the cabin, slamming the door against the storm. They wedged the post under the cracking beam just as it began to give way. The groan of the roof eased. They had done it. They had saved the house. They collapsed onto the floor, gasping for breath, covered in snow, their faces raw from the wind. The fire had nearly been blown out. The cabin was a wreck, but it was standing. In the sudden, relative quiet, he looked at her. Her hair was wild, her face smudged with dirt, and she was looking at him with an intensity that stole his breath. In that moment, trapped between a killer storm and a failing roof. They weren't a rancher and his mail-order bride. They were two survivors. He finally understood what old Jim meant. She was tougher than most. But the fear in her eyes wasn't just about the storm. He'd seen it before she grabbed the rope, a flicker of something deeper, a terror that had nothing to do with snow and wind. What was she really afraid of? In the aftermath of the near collapse, the tension in the cabin shifted. The storm still raged outside, but inside, something had broken open between them. They were survivors, bound by the shared terror and the desperate struggle. That night, as they huddled by the rebuilt fire, the words finally came. She told him about the mill in Kansas City, the endless clatter of the looms, the lint that choked the air and stole the breath from old women's lungs. She spoke of raising her siblings, of watching them leave one by one until she was utterly alone. "There was no one left to need me," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I had to leave, or I'd just wither away." Tom listened, and then for the first time in 6 years, he spoke of Maria. He told Lily about her laugh, about the way she believed in this land, in him. He described the day the beam broke, the awful finality of it. "I thought the land could fill the emptiness," he said, his voice raw. "But land can't speak back. It can't share the weight." Lily didn't offer empty platitudes. She just nodded. Maybe the land isn't meant to carry it alone. On the 4th morning, the storm broke. Tom pushed the door open to a world remade in glittering, blinding white. The snow was deep, the air so clean it burned. Lily stood beside him, her eyes wide with a quiet awe. "It's beautiful," she whispered. He wasn't looking at the snow. He was looking at her. "It is," he agreed. They spent the day digging out, their movements falling into an easy rhythm. The work was brutal, but she never faltered. That evening by the fire, she looked at him. "You've kept this place alive, all alone. That's no small thing." He shook his head. "Alive, maybe. Not living." A faint smile touched her lips. "Perhaps that can change." The words settled between them, a quiet promise. As the snow melted and spring began to breathe life back into the valley, the cabin changed. Under Lily's hands, it slowly transformed from a man's rough shelter into a home. She stitched curtains, organized the shelves, and planted herbs in pots. He found himself lingering indoors, drawn by her quiet presence. It wasn't just the house that was changing. He was changing too. He started leaving his boots outside. He stacked his tools neatly. Small things, but they felt monumental. She noticed. "You're trying," she said one evening, a soft smile in her eyes. "I appreciate it." He started teaching her the ways of the land, how to read tracks in the mud, how to tell a storm from a squall. He taught her how to handle his Winchester rifle. He expected her to be clumsy, hesitant. She wasn't. She held the rifle with a steady, familiar grip. She listened to his instructions, her eyes narrowed in concentration. On her 3rd shot, she hit the tin can he'd set on a fence post 50 yards away. Dead center. He stared, astonished. "Seems I can learn more than darning socks," she said with a triumphant grin. "Seems so," he replied, a strange feeling prickling his neck. That kind of skill didn't come from a textile mill. Laughter started to fill the cabin, a sound he hadn't heard in years. They teased each other, shared stories, but beneath the growing ease, the question still gnawed at him. The wooden bird, her skill with a rifle, and the way she sometimes looked towards the trail leading down the mountain, her face tight with an emotion he couldn't name. One night, she asked him, "Tell me, Tom, do you want just another pair of hands to keep this place running? Or do you want a wife?" Her question cut him to the quick. "I thought, after Maria, I couldn't want anything more," he said, his voice rough. "But since you came, I find myself hoping again." She reached across the table and laid her hand on his. You're allowed to live again, Tom. Her touch was a spark in the darkness. But even as he felt that spark, a shadow fell over them. McAllister, the rancher who'd lured away the third bride. He started causing trouble. A section of fence cut, letting a dozen head of cattle wander off. A well fouled with a dead rabbit. Small, cruel acts of sabotage. Tom rode over to confront him. McAllister just laughed, his eyes full of spite. Having trouble keeping your property in line, Red Hawk? He sneered. First your women, now your cows. It was more than just prejudice. It was a targeted campaign. Tom returned to the ranch, his jaw tight with anger. He found Lily by the corral, practicing with the Winchester. She loaded, aimed, and fired with a cold, deadly efficiency that sent a shiver down his spine. She wasn't just learning a new skill, she was preparing for a fight. That night, a rider came up the trail. Not a neighbor. A stranger with a hard face and colder eyes. He was a bounty hunter. He slid off his horse and showed Tom a worn, hand-drawn sketch. Looking for a woman, the man said, his voice like gravel. Goes by a few names. Last seen in Kansas City. Answers to the name Lily. The sketch was rough, but it was her. Unmistakably her. And beneath the drawing were two words that made the blood freeze in Tom's veins. Wanted. Dead or alive. Tom's mind raced. He looked from the bounty hunter's cold eyes to the rough sketch of the woman in his cabin. His woman. Never seen her. Tom said, his voice steady as stone. Lots of folks passing through. Can't keep track of them all. The bounty hunter spat a stream of tobacco juice near Tom's boots. Funny. The trail led straight here. A man in town said you just got yourself a new mail-order wife from back east. Man in town talks too much, Tom said, his hand moving ever so slightly closer to the axe handle leaning against the porch. She's from Ohio. Name's Sarah. The lie came easy, born of a sudden, fierce protectiveness that surprised him. The bounty hunter stared at him for a long, hard moment, then shrugged. Maybe my information's bad. He swung back onto his horse. But if you see a woman who looks like this, there's a $500 reward. Her name's not Lily Jameson. It's Lillian Davenport, and a man named Silas Blackwood wants her back very, very badly. He wheeled his horse around and rode off, leaving the name hanging in the air like poison. Silas Blackwood. Tom walked back into the cabin, the sketch crumpled in his fist. Lily was standing by the fire, her back to him. She knew. She must have seen the rider. Who is Silas Blackwood? He asked, his voice low and dangerous. She flinched as if he'd struck her. When she turned, her face was a mask of despair. The story tumbled out, a torrent of secrets and fear. Her name was Lillian Davenport. Her father had been a brilliant but poor inventor who worked at the same mill. He'd created a new type of loom shuttle, a design that could revolutionize the industry. Silas Blackwood, the cruel and powerful factory foreman, found out. He wanted the patent. Her father refused. So Blackwood arranged an accident. A faulty boiler. Her parents were killed in the fire. Blackwood seized control of the factory and her father's workshop, but he couldn't find the final patent schematics. He was convinced Lillian had them. He didn't just want the papers, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. He wanted me. He told me I belonged to him now, that he owned everything my father had, including his daughter. She had escaped that night, taking only the wooden bird her father had carved for her and the locket he always wore. She sold the locket to buy a ticket west, changing her name, creating a new identity from scratch. She wasn't just a mill worker tired of city smoke. She was a fugitive, running for her life. The letter to the broker had been a desperate prayer. She chose Arizona because it was remote, wild. She chose him because his letter spoke of honesty and faith, things she thought she'd never see again. Tom felt the floor drop out from under him. Their life, the home they were building, the trust, the laughter. It was all built on a lie. He wasn't her safe harbor. He was just her hiding place. He felt a surge of cold fury, fury at her for deceiving him, fury at Blackwood for his evil, fury at himself for being a fool. He looked at the woman he thought he knew, and all he saw was a stranger. "You brought this to my door," he said, his voice hollow. "This danger, this man." "I had nowhere else to go," she cried. "I thought I could disappear here." "People like Blackwood don't give up," he shot back. "Now McAllister is sniffing around, and bounty hunters are on my doorstep. You didn't escape your past, Lily. You just dragged it into mine." He couldn't bear to look at her. He strode out of the cabin and into the night, walking blindly, the cold air doing nothing to cool the fire in his gut. He was an Apache. He'd spent his life dealing with the mistrust and hatred of men like McAllister. Now, the one person he'd let in, the one person who'd made the silence bearable, had brought a far greater danger right into the heart of his home. He walked for hours, wrestling with the betrayal. But as his anger cooled, another feeling crept in. He remembered her face in the blizzard, her hand on the Winchester, her quiet courage. She had lied, yes, but she had also fought beside him. She had turned his lonely shack into a home. When he finally turned back, his heart heavy with a decision he didn't fully understand himself, he saw the light in the cabin window. He was resolved. This was his land. She was his wife. Her fight was now his fight. He pushed open the door, ready to tell her, ready to stand with her against whatever came. But the cabin was empty. The fire was dying. And on the table was a note, her neat handwriting a cruel slash across the wood. "I won't bring this danger to you. Forgive me." And beside the note lay the small carved wooden bird. She was gone. A cold dread, colder than any winter wind, washed over Tom. She was out there, alone, in the dark, with a bounty hunter and a man like Blackwood on her trail. He didn't hesitate. He grabbed his rifle, a pouch of supplies, and saddled his fastest horse. He was Apache. The land spoke a language to him that it kept secret from other men. He could track a hawk by its shadow. He would find her. He picked up her trail easily, a faint set of prints heading south, away from the main road, towards the broken, treacherous country of the canyons. She was smart. She knew to stay off the beaten path. But she didn't know the land like he did. He rode hard, pushing his horse, his eyes scanning every rock, every bush. By dawn, he found her tracks, and his heart turned to ice. There was a second set of prints beside hers, a man's boot, heavy, confident, and a third set of tracks from a shod horse. McAllister. The bounty hunter must have gone straight to him. They were working together, hunting her down like an animal. A new set of tracks joined the others. A fine-looking horse, ridden by a man in city boots. Blackwood. They had her trapped. He spurred his horse, his mind a storm of rage and fear. He found where they'd cornered her. A small box canyon, a dead end with sheer rock walls. It was a kill box. He dismounted, creeping forward on foot, his movements silent as a mountain lion. He peered over a rocky ledge and saw them. Lily was backed against the canyon wall, her face pale but defiant. Blackwood stood before her, a cruel smile on his face. He was dressed in fine city clothes that looked ridiculous in the harsh Arizona sun. "Did you really think you could escape me, Lillian?" he sneered. "This dusty savage and his hovel? I own you." McAllister and the bounty hunter stood off to the side, rifles held loosely, watching the show. "I have the reward money, McAllister," Blackwood said without looking at him. "And once we're done here, the rancher's land is all yours. No one will question what happened to the Apache and his runaway bride." "I don't have the papers," Lily said, her voice shaking but clear. "They burned with my father." "You're a terrible liar," Blackwood said, taking a step closer. "But it doesn't matter. I don't need them anymore. I just need you." He reached for her. Tom knew he had only one chance. He couldn't fight all three of them head on. He had to use the land. He looked up at the loose shale on the cliff face above McAllister and the bounty hunter. A desperate plan formed in his mind. He raised his Winchester and fired, not at the men, at the rocks above them. The shot echoed through the canyon. The cliff face seemed to explode. A river of rock and shale cascaded down, a miniature avalanche. McAllister and the bounty hunter yelled in surprise, jumping back as the rocks buried the spot where they'd been standing. In the ensuing chaos of dust and shouting, Tom scrambled down the rocks. Blackwood spun around, his face a mask of fury, pulling a small derringer from his coat. Tom didn't hesitate. He charged, lowering his shoulder and slamming into Blackwood like a battering ram. The smaller man flew backwards, the derringer skittering away into the dust. Before McAllister or the bounty hunter could recover and bring their rifles to bear, Tom was on his feet, pulling Lily behind the cover of a large boulder. "Are you hurt?" he gasped. "No," she said, her eyes wide with shock and something else, gratitude, relief. "You came back. This is my land," he said grimly, "and you are my wife." A rifle shot splintered the rock near his head. "We have to move." The canyon was a maze of rocks and shadows. He knew every inch of it. He led her through a narrow crevice he'd discovered as a boy, a passage hidden behind a curtain of old juniper roots. They emerged higher up the canyon wall, with a clear view of the men below searching for them in the dust. "They're trapped now," Tom whispered. "There's only one way out of this canyon." They watched as the three men argued, their voices carrying in the clear air. The bounty hunter wanted to leave, his nerve broken by the rock slide. McAllister was furious about the land he thought was his. Blackwood was obsessed, screaming Lily's name. It was then that Lily reached into a hidden seam in her dress and pulled out a small, oilskin-wrapped packet. The patent papers. "I couldn't let them be destroyed," she whispered. "It was all I had left of him." A cold resolve settled on Tom's face. This had to end. Here. Today. "Stay here," he told her. "No," she said, her hand gripping the Winchester she had somehow managed to keep hold of. "You said it yourself. My fight. Your fight. We do this together." He looked at her, at the fire in her eyes, and saw not the frightened fugitive, but the woman who had faced down a blizzard and rebuilt his life. He nodded. They waited. As dusk began to fall, the men below grew desperate. They decided to split up to cover more ground. It was the mistake Tom had been waiting for. The bounty hunter was the first to wander near their position. Tom moved like a shadow, disarming him from behind with a single, swift blow. He tied and gagged the man, leaving him hidden in the brush. One down. Next was McAllister, circling around the far side. Lily saw him first. She raised the Winchester, her aim steady. "Don't kill him," Tom said. "Just make him regret coming here." The rifle cracked. McAllister screamed and dropped his gun, clutching a leg now bleeding freely from a clean shot through the thigh. He wouldn't be running anywhere. 2 down. That left only Blackwood. He heard the shot, and McAllister's scream, and began firing wildly into the shadows. "Come out, Lillian! Face me!" Tom and Lily circled around him, using the deepening twilight as their cloak. They cornered him near the canyon entrance. He was out of bullets, his fine suit torn and filthy, his face crazed with rage. "It's over, Blackwood," Tom said, stepping out from behind a rock, his rifle aimed at the man's chest. Blackwood lunged, not at Tom, but at Lily, who had emerged from the other side. He was faster than Tom expected. He grabbed her, holding a knife to her throat. "The papers, Lillian, or he watches you die." Tom froze, his heart seizing in his chest. "Give them to him, Lily," he said, his voice tight. Lily looked at Tom, her eyes locking with his. Then she did something he never expected. She threw the oilskin packet, not at Blackwood, but into the small campfire McAllister had built earlier. The packet ignited instantly, the priceless papers turning to black ash in seconds. Blackwood screamed in rage, his concentration breaking for a split second. It was all the opening Tom needed. He fired. The shot didn't kill Blackwood, but it tore through his knife hand. The weapon clattered to the ground. Tom was on him in an instant, the fight ending with a single, brutal punch. It was over. They rode back to the ranch under a sky full of stars, leading a horse carrying 3 tied-up men. The sheriff, alerted by the hired boy Tom had sent for help before he'd left, met them on the road. The story came out. McAllister's cattle rustling, the bounty hunter's warrant, and Silas Blackwood's long list of crimes. Justice, swift and final, had come to the rim. Back at the cabin, the silence returned, but it was different now. Not empty. Heavy with unspoken things. They cleaned their wounds, the silence stretching between them. Finally, on the porch, watching the moon rise over the land they had fought for, he turned to her. "You asked me once," he began, his voice low, "if I wanted a pair of hands or a wife." He took her hand, his thumb stroking her knuckles. "I was wrong. I don't just want a wife. I need a partner. Your past, your fight. It's ours now." Tears welled in her eyes, silver in the moonlight. "My past is full of lies, Tom. Our future will be full of truth," he said, pulling her close. She leaned her head against his chest, a soft sigh escaping her lips. "There's one more truth you should know," she whispered, so quietly he almost didn't hear. She took his hand and placed it on her still flat belly. "I'm with child." The world stopped. The wind in the pines, the chirp of the crickets, the beat of his own heart. A child, a future, a legacy. He looked out at the dark, silent land, at the fences stretching out like a promise. The silence wasn't a weight anymore. It was peace. He looked down at the woman in his arms, the woman who had brought a storm to his door, and then taught him how to live through it. He was no longer just Tom Redhawk, the lonely Apache rancher. He was a husband, and soon he would be a father. Together, they had faced down the ghosts of the past and the demons of the present, and together they would build a home so strong no storm could ever break it. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more tales of courage and survival, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Your support means I can keep finding and sharing these incredible journeys. Thank you for watching.